What are you arguing for?
Well, it's very difficult to get it out in sound bites. It's a complete philosophical counter-revolution. In the 1950s and 1960s in this country, we abandoned the idea that crime was committed by people because they had evil intentions, didn't know how to behave, and we instead adopted the idea that people committed crime because of the social conditions they lived in, because their houses were poorly furnished or whatever it was, and because they were poor. This is obviously nonsense, because during the most recent period of profound poverty, hunger and deprivation in our society, namely the 1930s, the level of crime was extraordinarily low. And it's a fatuous claim, but it's widely believed by the left. And it's also to do with the general shying away from the idea of personal responsibility. And from that arose a complete evisceration of all the major features of the criminal justice system. The police were no longer allowed to patrol preventively on the assumption that if you don't patrol preventively, then disorder and crime break out. The courts no longer took crime particularly seriously. And the prisons, instead of being places of austere but well-ordered punishment, became pointless warehouses where people were kept for varying lengths of time. This is the great paradox of this policy, and I strive to get this across, because people say to me, oh, well, surely there are so many people in the prisons, that must mean we're being tough on crime. Let me explain. Please do, because it's so crucial to the whole thing. The idea of prison is that on a second offence, basically, you should go there. If first offenders should be given some latitude.
Yeah.
I think everybody. If someone commits a second crime, then prison is there for it. In prison, when you get there, should be a place of hard work and fairly, how shall I put it, austere conditions, not cruelty, not torture, not beatings, but you know you're there. I don't believe in long sentences. That's not the point. And you should encounter it at an early stage in your career of wrongdoing, not merely for your own good, but for the good of other people around you who see what happens to you and who realise that following a career of crime is not a good thing. These days, you probably have to commit about 35 or 40 offences before you go near a prison. And the people who go to prison are already recidivists, they're already long-term repeat offenders, and the chances of it doing them any good are absolutely zero. The other thing is that prisons are no longer under the control of the authorities. They're not places of hard work and austerity. They're places which are largely run by the prisoners themselves, in which nobody can learn anything at all except to be told what to do by
Well, they learn other things. They learn
horrible places.
They learn how to become better burglars.
But they're horrible in the wrong way.
Yeah. You talk about personal responsibility in the 1930s. Was that because we were more God-fearing, because people examined their conscience because they believed in God a bit more? Was that
certainly that was a large element of it, and because that lay underneath the belief in God, which was then common, and the Christianity, which was then common, lay underneath the idea that you should not steal. For instance, people just simply felt that it was wrong. And it was a society in which these things were disapproved of. I think most people disapprove of them now, honestly. I don't think that the public have stopped disapproving of thieving and violence. I think the public still hate thieving, violence, what is now dismissed by Blairites in nice parts of town as antisocial behaviour, which actually involves people's lives being made total miseries by selfishness and noise and
I recommend people read your piece, because you capture that sense of the stuff that's not appearing in the crime figures, that's not even being treated by the police as crimes. But actually, if you live in some sinker state, not even a sinker state, but somewhere where the policymakers don't live, you see it as an everyday reality.
Yeah. And what's more, there's nothing you can do about it, because if you were to go to the authorities, then you would be treated as what is called a grass and given a very hard time. Your windows go in at the very least. It's impossible to fight against it because these people have been abandoned. It's like the withdrawal of the Roman Empire. It's territories which were used to being orderly and protected have suddenly been left wholly unprotected. Well, not suddenly.
And we're talking about 5% of the country here? What are we talking about? What is it?
I don't know exactly how big a part of the country it is, but there are large parts of major cities where basically the writ of the law does not run. And people know this, and they behave accordingly.
And they've closed down police stations.
Well, police stations have been...
Police stations.
I wrote, I think, in 2001 for the Mail on Sunday an article attacking the closure of police stations. And I got a lot of support from people. I remember them writing in and saying, great, nothing happened. They carried on closing them. They carried on closing the police houses in villages. Yeah. The police no longer believe...
Police stations are closing at the rate of one every fortnight.
But police no longer believe they should be present. They, instead of being... The whole point of them was that they were present and visible. as individuals on the streets, known, knowing, and respected by the law-abiding and feared by the lawless. They've vanished. And what is it that they do? We know that there are a lot of them because every so often, for various occasions, out they come in huge numbers. Where they stock them and stack them when they're not doing this, I don't know. But most of the time, my basic question is this: if the entire police force of this country was abducted by aliens, how long would it take you to find out? And they just are not there. So they would continue not being there, and you wouldn't know they were any more not there than they are already. Absence is their main feature. They react to crime and disorder after it's happened instead of preventing it. Everybody knows that an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Turning up mob-handed in lots of cars with flashing lights after trouble has begun is useless. And turning up after the simple proposition, I make it again: you cannot unburgle a person who's been burgled. You cannot unmug a person who's been mugged. You cannot, and this is really tragic, especially in London, you cannot unstab a person who's been stabbed. Whatever you do, no amount of police presence later, no amount of heavy sentences later will make any difference. You've got to be there. They've stopped doing it. They don't really believe in doing it anymore. And the courts have been, for years and years, under pressure not to send people to prison, not to take serious action against them, until they absolutely have to. And the result of this, the paradoxical result of this, is we have the fullest prisons we've ever had in our history.
Just say something to the police officer who may be watching, thinking, hang on a minute, Peter Hitchens, I turned up in a police car last night responding to a brawl on the high street because everybody was drunk outside the pub, and I got filled in, and I get filled in maybe once a year. You know,
it's horrible.
We do have tens of thousands of police officers who remain very committed to the oaths they've taken.
Maybe we do, but we have far more police than we used to have in the days when the job was done properly. If the police who are encountering these horrible circumstances, and I would point out, by the way, that even journalists sometimes get hurt in the course of their duties, so that it doesn't necessarily give you a free pass, that sometimes things go wrong for you. But if the police had actually done what I recommend and what Robert Peel recommended, which is to be on the streets as individuals, getting to know the public, and being out there where they learnt what was going on, these events which they have to rush to where they're in danger would not happen half so much. And another thing, if they would only prosecute, and if the courts would only punish particularly drug offences, and the drug offences play a huge part in this violence, there would be a lot less of it.